Good evening, everyone. Good evening. How nice to see so many people out at this time of year, particularly. And I can feel the energy in the room, and for good reason. So welcome, everyone, to this evening event with Linda Sarsour, an engaged and brilliant organizer of social movements for justice, for peace, and for civic participation at its fullest and most inclusive. I'm Paula Giddings, and as a professor in Africana Studies and SWAG, and especially as the editor of Meridian's Feminism, Race, Transnationalism, I'm especially pleased to have Linda among us. Before we begin, and I formally welcome her, let me share a few logistical details with you. First, please take a card. See the cards as you enter the room or at your seats, so you may write down questions you have. After Linda's talk, we will collect the cards so we can try to give as much time as possible to answering the questions on them. For any reporters in the audience, we have two spokespeople who you can talk to. Mohamed Mak, a professor in French Studies and SWAG, as well as Leah Parker Burstein, a Smith student. Maybe you can raise your hand so, you know. Also, I want to thank everyone who made this event possible. From the student groups, such as Students for Justice in Palestine and Al-Iman, as well as departments and programs, including the study of women and gender, history, Middle East studies, Meridians, of course, and an archival activist initiative named after Gloria Steinem. A special thanks to Stacy Schmeidel, Director of Media Relations. As a past executive director of the Arab American Association, Linda, a Palestinian American, successfully worked to have Muslim holidays recognized in New York City public schools and advocated passage of the city's Community Safety Act, which created an independent office to review police policy. That's more than a notion, believe me. Most recently, she was co-chair with Tamika Mallory, Carmen Perez, and Bob Bland of the 2017 Women's March, held the day after Donald Trump's inauguration. In part because of her role at the march, which was seen and or attended by millions of men, women, and children throughout the U.S. and cities around the world, Linda has just been named as one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. This is the second time we've been graced with Linda's presence in recent years. 2 years ago, she generously agreed to attend an interfaith dinner to celebrate Eid that was organized by the Center for Religious and Spiritual Life and Al-Iman, the Muslim students' organization at Smith. Hundreds of students attended Linda's event then, and as we can see, and many of us are also gathering here today. While our welcome remains constant and warm, our current context is different. We are more active than ever before, but we are also more polarized than ever. And those who dare to lead in this period, who have the courage to lead, must face down the most vile and violent slander that threatens to poison the very air around us. So we gather today with more than simply a new president in Washington. We are living in times that demand our renewed commitment to building an intersectional unity, a unity arrived at through our differences and even because of our differences. In the book, We Too Sing America, Deepa Ayer tells a story of Linda's role after the brutal murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And I quote from the text. On the Monday after Michael Brown's death, Mustafa Abdullah of the ACLU in St. Louis, Missouri, came to work to find his voicemail full of messages. One of the calls he took that morning was from Linda. She asked where the local Muslim community was on what happened to Mike Brown. That really centered me, he said. Of course, Muslims had to speak up. Within days, Mustafa, Linda, Dawood Walid, who is the executive director of the Michigan chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, and a community activist by the name of Muhammad Malik, started a group called Muslims for Ferguson. Over the coming weeks and months, they held national calls attended by hundreds of people, amplified the demands from Ferguson organizers and protesters, and participated in solidarity actions around the country. When Linda sees injustice, she takes action. When she heard about the anti-Semitic desecration of the Jewish cemeteries in Philadelphia and St. Louis this February, she called for funds to restore the vandalized cemeteries, raising $140,000 worth of donations in 2 days. Her leadership is both quiet in her calls to local leaders like Mustafa and very public, such as her willingness to shoulder the work of organizing women's marches around the country and ultimately around the world. Tonight, Linda will talk about intersectionality in the streets and the ways that we live, we act, we hope and breathe intersectional politics to realize justice across many boundaries. Please join me in welcoming Linda Sarsour.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for that. I'm just overwhelmed with emotions being here with your community in this space. I just came also from a meeting with leaders of student groups at this college campus, and I'm just, the future is bright, even though we may not see that light at this very moment. I'm humbled by this introduction, just hearing these things as I, in the midst of a embroiled controversy, as I find myself every week in one of these controversies where the very people who are in opposition to all of the principles and values that I have and hold of compassion, love, inclusivity, justice, liberation for all people, have chosen to defame and slander me, although my track record is as clear as a cup of water. And unfortunately, those on the other side oftentimes are louder than those of us who center love and inclusion. So to be here and hear you just really just overwhelmed me with emotion. So thank you, and I'm grateful to be here with you in this space. So one of the most important things that you will ever learn about me or know about me is that I'm from Brooklyn, New York. And that piece of my identity is very important to me, and it kind of tells you a lot about who I am. And the reason why people might say I don't really get it, Brooklyn, folks from Brooklyn, I think we're like born without a filter. We don't kind of think about what we say. Whatever is in the heart and the mind just kind of gets put out there. People from New York just tell it like it is, but in particular from Brooklyn, you tell it like it is. And the reason why I say that is I want to be here in a space with you to really speak my truth, and to really offer you from the deepest of my heart how I'm feeling at this moment, where we are at this moment as a community, as a country, and where we really need to go from my perspective. If there is something I say that makes anybody feel uncomfortable, I want you to be open-minded and open-hearted and to sit with your discomfort, because it's okay. It's okay for us to sometimes be challenged and to feel uncomfortable, as I too am always uncomfortable in many spaces that I organize in. I was like many of you. I was outraged. I was devastated at the election results. I did everything that I could. I was a national surrogate for Bernie Sanders, and when Bernie Sanders lost the primaries, I knew what the right thing was to do. I knew what I had to do to protect the most marginalized communities in this country who have already been experiencing oppression and marginalization way before there ever was a Donald Trump. And when that night came, and being somebody in New York City, and for folks that know, I'm a media commentator, so that whole day I was spending it on national television talking about what I think is going to happen, where we were going to lose, where we were going to win. And I remember that night, it was about 11 o'clock at night, and it was when the horror started happening, right? When everybody started feeling that literally I'm getting goosebumps going back to that night at 11 o'clock when the hairs on your body were going up and you were just saying to yourself, this can't be happening. And at that moment, I'm about to put a mic on in Rockefeller Plaza, and my phone started ringing like constantly. So I pulled it out of my pocket, I looked, it was my son. Now mind you, my son is 17 years old. So I ignored him twice, and then the third time he just kept calling. I do that sometimes to my kids. But my son is not that kind of kid, right? My son's the kind of kid who will call me, and then when I don't answer, he'll drop me a text message and just say, I'm gonna be out with my friends, just so you know. And we go on from there. But the fact that my son kept calling, I told the lady, you gotta excuse me for a second. I pick up my cell phone, it's my son, and he's like, why is this happening? What's going on here? What is going, and just kind of, like I was shocked by my son's, my apolitical son, who's like sitting at home confused about what's happening and has so much despair in his voice. And I literally took my mic off, I gave it back to the lady, and I said, look, I gotta go home. I get home, and here are my three children, a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 17-year-old, literally curled up on a couch watching the results come in. And the minute I open the door, my 12-year-old daughter looks back at the door and burst out into tears. And I thought to myself, the impact that this is happening on my own children, love children, try to give them everything that I can, have a loving family, a loving support system, and my 12-year-old daughter is like, what are they going to do to us? Where are they going to put us? And that was really a defining moment for me. Over the course of my activism career, there have been those, what they call those radicalizing moments. Ferguson was a radicalizing moment for me, and watching my daughter ask me, where are they going to put us, was another radicalizing moment for me. And that was the moment when I went from despair and horror to perpetual outrage. And I had to put myself back together and decide at that moment who I wanted to be in this moment, what I wanted to stand for in this moment, and choose a side that I wanted to be on. And on that day, on that night, I chose to be in the resistance. And I'll say this again, when the Women's March happened, I knew it was going to be big. I didn't know it was going to be that big, but I knew it was going to be big. And I had mixed feelings the day that I showed up to Washington, D.C., to the Women's March at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I already saw a pool of people already coming, and it was, the event started at 10, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, there were already people there. So I knew it was going to be extra big. And the mixed feelings that I had as I talked to my colleagues, Tamika Mallory and Carmen Perez in particular, Tamika Mallory is African American. She's been a civil rights leader for about 20 years. Carmen Perez has been doing criminal justice reform for about 20 years, and she's Mexican, a Mexican-American Chicana woman. And we had this moment where we were so overwhelmed with different types of emotions, but one of the emotions was, Tamika said, where were all these people before? Where were they when Sandra Bland was murdered in a jail cell? Where were they when Mike Brown laid outside for 4.5 hours swimming in his blood and then picked up and put in the back of a SUV like he was a bag of rocks? Where were those people? Where were those people under the Obama administration when we were deporting 1,000 immigrants a day? Where were those people? And it was a moment of triumph, and you felt victorious because you were able to bring out all your fellow Americans and millions of your fellow Americans and millions of your global citizens across the world. But there was that moment for communities of color to say, where have you been when we have been under so much oppression in this country as a country that purports to be the example of human rights? Where were you? But then we decided to not say, where were you, but to say, welcome. Welcome to our world and welcome to the movement. And I want us to be rooted in a reality of what's actually happening. People, in order for us to win and in order for us to protect the most marginalized amongst us, we need to understand the actual reality that we're organizing in. I don't know if anyone here has ever been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And it's a space where you have to prepare yourself emotionally to walk into a space like that. Even as a person who is not a Jewish American, to believe that some time in our history that we human beings inflicted those types of atrocities on other human beings, I can't even imagine what those experiences were like and that we actually allowed that to happen in recent history. And as I was in the Holocaust Museum, I saw a sign on the wall. And the sign said, "Early warning signs of fascism." And I stood and I read the sign. And the sign said, disdain for human rights, disdain for the arts and intellectuals, as we just defunded the National Endowment for the Arts. Powerful and continuing nationalism, rampant sexism, supremacy of the military, obsession with crime and punishment, controlled mass media, labor power suppressed, labor power suppressed, corporate power protected, obsession with national security, identification of enemies as a unifying cause, fraudulent elections. And I stood there, and in that moment, you want to read it again, because you want to make sure that your eyes are reading the right thing, that you didn't just imagine yourself reading what you just read. And all of a sudden, I felt like this warmness come over my body. And for a little bit, I actually felt some fear. And I said, wow, there really isn't anything on that list that isn't some way already happening, or this administration isn't already hinting at in some kind of way. So I want us to be rooted in a reality that fascism is already here. And we have to understand what our role is in this current moment under this type of administration. People will say to me, Linda, you are an alarmist. You're just a drama queen. And it was interesting that those very people that were telling me that were the same people that were telling me during the campaign that everything that Donald Trump and other Republican candidates were proposing were just campaign rhetoric. They were just saying those things to get votes. And for a little while, I believed them. And then immediately, Inauguration Day happened, and then the Women's March happened, and the next weekend, we were at the airports. Because guess what happened? Muslim ban #1 already started. We weren't even in office for a week. We already started hearing about the potential rollback of trans and LGBTQ rights. We already started hearing of stories of raids on undocumented immigrants across the country. People afraid to leave their homes and go to work and even take their children to school. Just within these 100 days, 200 Iraqi civilians were killed in the deadliest airstrike since 2003. I mean, we're hearing things about nuclear weapons and nuclear war. We're talking about voting rights and talking about, the things that we are, it's absolutely outrageous. Talking about creating a new office that specifically looks at crimes committed by immigrants called Voice. I mean, the deletion of certain parts of the government that existed under Obama and many other Republican administrations, like the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties people. Like, these things are already happening, and it's only been 100 days. I feel like it's been 100 years. So I say this to all of you because I feel like we have to be rooted in this reality in order for us to understand how we're going to organize. And what we find is people who say the things that I say are being called anti-American. That somehow, because I criticize my government, and I have criticized my government for many years, somehow that makes me disloyal, right? That somehow that who I am is antithetical to what it means to be an American. And the reason why I say that to you is because that is what is causing people to not feel courageous enough to want to organize under an administration that is like this. Because who wants to be called anti-American? But what I tell you in this room, and I believe this wholeheartedly, that dissent is the highest form of patriotism. And that if you love your country from the deepest of your heart, and I was born and raised here, and this country gave my Palestinian immigrant parents who came here from living under military occupation the opportunities to thrive, to be small business owners, to have children, to give us opportunities they would have never had. And I am grateful for that. But it also means that I want my country to be the greatest nation on earth. And that means I have to challenge and push my country because I love my country that much. And in order for us to ensure that we are the greatest nation on earth, that we learn from mistakes that we have made in history, we have to name those things. So when people tell me, I don't know what you're worried about, Linda, I say, okay, let's have a history lesson together. There's nothing wrong with us reminding people around us that our country was founded on the genocide of Native Americans. That's just fact of the matter. Like, we don't have to debate that. We had to exterminate people who were already living here in order for us to create a nation for people to be free. We also are a nation founded on the enslavement of black people. There's no debate about that. We brought and forced people to come to this country to help build this nation. They were forced to build this nation, stripped from their families. That happened in these United States of America. We also are a nation that segregated people by race. And we may not do that officially right now, but we still segregate people by race. Let's go to Chicago. Let's go to Detroit. Let's go to New York City. I can take you to places and show you clear segregation based on a railroad line. We're also a nation that when they said Muslim ban, people said, that's unconstitutional. You can't just ban a whole group of people. Linda, they just can't do that. Well, we did ban the Chinese when we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, and we decided for a period of time that the Chinese weren't allowed to come into and immigrate into our country, so we did that. We're also a country that interned Japanese Americans. We decided that Japanese Americans were disloyal to America, that they were a suspect community, that they were not to be trusted, that they were a threat to our American sovereignty. And what did we do to them? We went to their homes and rounded them up with kids as young as toddlers and put them on camps on this US soil. We say, oh, we ended slavery. But we're engaging in modern day slavery with mass incarceration. We are not the largest country in the world. We are not the most populated country in the world. But we have the largest prison population by far of any country across the world. And if you know what people get paid who are engaging in labor in prisons, it is absolutely right to say that mass incarceration is modern day slavery. about a month, maybe 5 weeks ago, I had one of those moments, another one of those moments where your hair stand up on your body. And it was at an event where it was a recognition of the Day of Remembrance of Japanese internment and the signing of Executive Order 9066 by President Roosevelt. And what got the hairs on my body to stand was that it was this, listen to this, 75th anniversary. 75 years was not that long ago, right? This is not something that happened 6 centuries ago. 75 years means that there are people who are still alive today that were children in these camps and remember what it meant to be a Japanese American in a camp on this US soil. And in fact, at the event, a woman by the name of Suki in New York City was so moved by an event that was for Women's History Month. It actually had nothing to do with Japanese internment. I was the one, I remember at this moment, this particular, where I invoked the Day of Remembrance because I happened to be at an event the day before. And this Japanese woman stood up and said, do you know that I have been in so many spaces and it's hardly that you hear people invoke that this country interned Japanese Americans. Rarely do you hear people talk about it. And she said, I'm grateful that people remember the dark moments of our history and even those that included Japanese Americans. I was at a university in the Midwest, and it was a very similar event, just like this one. And at the end, there was question and answer. And this Muslim boy from the Muslim Student Association stood up. And he said, Sister Linda, I have a question. I want to know who lived in these United States of America at the time of Japanese internment camps. He's like, I want to know who those people were. Who were those people that allowed for their Japanese American neighbors to be stripped from their homes and taken to camp? Who were those people? And all of a sudden, he just sat down. It was almost like he wanted to put the question out in the air for other people to hear it, to listen to him and to his concerns, to his anxiety, to the fear that he had in his heart. And the room was silent, and I didn't answer his question because at that moment I didn't have an answer to his question. And about 4 days later, I'm sitting in my office, and then his voice came to me, and I thought to myself, I know exactly who those people were. They were the silent majority. They were well-intentioned people. They were just people that closed their blinds, put their TVs on a little louder so they don't hear their neighbors screaming, and just went on with their lives. The reason why I tell you these things is because in every moment in history, whether we're talking about Syrian refugees, and we're in a debate about whether we are going to allow people who are fleeing the very same terrorism that we are claiming to be fighting against. People who are literally in a modern day genocide. There have been 500,000 Syrians that have been massacred at the hands of the Syrian regime as well as at the hands of terrorists. Babies crying for their parents in some of the most horrific conditions in refugee camps all over the world. And it reminds me of, this is not the first time we've shut the door on refugees. Do we remember that we as a nation told Jewish refugees we didn't want them here? And we closed our doors to them and sent them back. And I always say to people, I feel that we as a country need to come to terms that we somehow were complicit in the atrocities that happened to Jews as we sat back and allowed that to happen and denied safety and security for those that chose and wanted to come and flee and be here with us in these United States of America. Why do we allow history to continue to repeat itself over and over and over again? And I'll tell you why. What we have to be aware of when we're living under fascism is alternative facts and fake news and the otherization of any community. Because if someone keeps telling you the same thing over and over and over again and telling you somebody's evil, 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 guess what? You may come to a point where you start believing that maybe they're right. Maybe we don't want Muslims in this country. Maybe we don't want Mexicans in this country. Every point in history, it has been the otherization, the vilification that has caused people to justify anything from Chinese exclusion to Japanese internment to segregation by race. We allow those things to happen because we end up falling into believing the messaging that is coming out that's often at the hands of government officials and administrations, because we think they're right, because, you know, how did they get into power? They must know something, right? Or we stop being able to tell the difference between journalism with integrity, people who actually have taken on journalism with facts, people who research, people who talk to those from those communities, and we start sharing everything on Facebook. Do you understand what I do? There are days that I survey my timeline on Facebook. And I actually go on my timeline and comment and say, did you know that this article that you shared is from a right-wing media outlet? I said, did you know that Breitbart is a media outlet that was basically ran by Steve Bannon, the chief strategist at the White House, who is an open homophobic, anti-Semite Islamophobe? And you're sharing that article believing it's actual news, that it's being, like, not biased? So we have to be very careful about how we may be, in fact, unconsciously engaging in the otherization of a community based on the type of information that we choose to share. So that's the first thing that I will say for me right now, is being able to corroborate news and being able to ensure that when we're sharing information that people are seeing us as a resource, that we need to be as careful and cautious as possible. You know, on this topic of intersectionality, and people will say there's a big political spectrum, right? All the way to the right, all the way to the left. I'm going to be honest with you. As a Palestinian, Muslim, progressive, sometimes I don't find any place on the spectrum, because concepts like Islamophobia actually exist both on the right and on the left. Bill Maher is an example, right? And so I'm not engaging in this conversation about talking to a particular group of people. What I'm saying, and my message always is at the end of the day, regardless of where we were this election, I think there are some universal principles and values that I think we could all agree on and share. And I think it's very simple. And one of the reasons why the Women's March on Washington was so successful, I'm not saying right-wing, folks came to our march, but it was a lot of more new people that came to the march. Some of them may have been Republican and were just outraged at the fact that we allowed a sexist, misogynist, racist, homophobe walk into the White House. And the reason why I'm saying that is because if we're able to organize ourselves around basic values of everybody in this country deserves to live in safety and deserves to be respected regardless of what their political views are, their religion, their sexual orientation, their ethnicity, their nationality. I think concepts of family are important, that when we talk about immigration, that it's not about undocumented immigrants versus people who want to call them illegal aliens, which is absolutely horrific that people think that that's still a term that we use. But the fact that these are families that we're talking about where children are losing their parents, that the fact that those that purport to be conservative and value family and family values are the same people who want to separate families from each other. So we need to be able to remind people what their actual values are, because in fact I do believe that everybody has some sort of common ground on those basic human principles and values. Now, progressives, I consider myself to be, I won't say where on the spectrum I am as progressive because I feel like I fluctuate a little bit, but I consider myself to be a progressive activist. And I always ask people this question. Progressives say, we're progressive, we're ahead of the game, we stand for compassion and love and justice and freedom and liberation, right? Like that's what the progressives say. So I want to ask progressives, and I do believe that generally speaking, we may be a lot more powerful than we are showing. How is it that people who are united around divisiveness and otherization and hatred and those who are anti-immigrant and anti-women and anti-black and all that stuff, how is it that they happen to be more powerful and louder than people who say that we are united around principles of compassion, love, justice, freedom, and liberation? I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. Mathematically, it doesn't make sense to me. And I always say to people, I say, why is it that, is it that they somehow love their families more than we do? Is it that they're more educated than we are? Is it because they have more money than we have? Like, I don't really think that any of that is the case. I just think that some of us have become complacent in a country that in order to continue to evolve, complacency is the disease that's deteriorating our free democracy in these United States of America. There is no room for complacency and apathy under this type of administration right now. So if you were one of those before where you were like, look, this is just always terrible, like I don't have time, that was okay before. Not okay right now. And one of the things that I have helped to bring back to the movements is a concept that was actually dubbed by an African-American professor and feminist, Kimberly Crenshaw. She was the one that came up with intersectional feminism, not me, not the Women's March. And we were able to live out Kimberly Crenshaw's term in real life. What does intersectional feminism look like? It's exactly what it sounds like. Why is it that in the progressive movement, the climate justice people are sitting in that corner, the racial justice people are up there, the immigrant rights and those organizing around ending deportations are in another room somewhere else, the reproductive rights groups are doing their own thing, and we're engaging in separate movements. And the reason why that has been so dangerous for us is because we are always pinned up against each other. Someone in power is giving something to one movement and asking that one movement not to bring up another movement. And we still lose. So it's not even that we were organizing in these different kind of silos, all important silos, and winning. Even when we were organizing separately, we were still losing. So the issue here for me is if we're already losing, why don't we work together, right? Maintain our principles and values and lose with some dignity and build power. Is that crazy? So at the Women's March, people criticized us and said, how are you having a women's march and you're talking about racial justice and climate justice and reproductive rights and this and that? It's just going to be a mishmash. And of course, as you're women, you don't have strategy. You just want to do things. What? Actually, they did say that. Actually, there was one guy who wrote a piece in the Huffington Post that was like, why don't you call it the People's March? Why does it have to be the Women's March? I'm like, really, brother? Like, come on. That section of Huffington Post could have used a more productive blog. So let me answer his question. No one said this wasn't a People's March. It was the Women's March because it was led by women. So everybody was welcome to be there, but you had to be okay with being led by women, and in particular, being led by women of color. So that was the first part. Then you also had to be okay with coming to a march that centered the most important issues facing the American people at this time. Racial justice, reproductive rights, equal pay, trans and LGBTQ rights, religious freedom issues, healthcare and healthcare access, and climate justice, and all the things that you saw us talk about at the Women's March. Why? In order for us to organize in a powerful way, We have to see people as whole people. And we also cannot impose priorities of issues on anybody. So when we had the hard conversation about becoming an intersectional march and movement, one of the questions I asked some of the most wonderful white women I've ever organized with, I said to them, let me ask you a question. You want this to be about reproductive rights and about equal pay? They were like, yeah, pretty important issues that affect women. I said to them, you can't talk about equal pay if you don't talk about race. Because you want to get paid the same as a white man. Black women are not even getting paid the same as a white woman. So you can't talk about equal pay without talking about race. Same thing with any issue. There has to be a way for us to see people as whole people and say that when you ask an undocumented mother what her top priority issue is, I guarantee you she's not going to say reproductive rights. She's going to say, my top priority issue is that I stay united with my family, or that my husband is not deported, or that I'm able to work in this country and feed my children. So the question is, can we organize with someone who thinks reproductive rights is their top priority issue, and then a black woman says it's number 3, and an undocumented woman says it's number 4? Why not? We all care about it, but can we also organize with black women from Flint who are being impacted by a water crisis? That's their top priority issue in Flint, which is also a climate justice / racial justice / poverty issue. There's a lot of things wrapped up in people's lives that people are more able to come to a table if you say to them, you know what, all of you is welcome. All the complexities, all the issues that impact you, bring them here, because it is not our place to ask people to say, you know what, that whole racial justice thing, it's really complicated. Keep that out. In this room, we're only going to talk about reproductive rights. And we did it. And our platform that we created for the Women's March on Washington, which is what we call our unity principles, has been dubbed the most progressive, bold platform that has ever been written ever. And I'm very proud of that, and I challenge you, if you haven't read it, to read it, and I guarantee you that you will agree. You may not agree with every point that's on it, but you will agree it is one of the most progressive and bold unity principles that you've ever seen for any movement. And what I mean at the most basic level is that we have to believe in ourselves enough and not underestimate ourselves, our hearts, and our minds, that you could say Black Lives Matter, you could say justice for undocumented immigrants, you could say we got to protect our planet, you could say that you want to defend the rights of LGBTQI communities, you can say no ban on the Muslims, all in one breath. It doesn't take anything away from us. Our minds and intellect is big enough, our hearts are big enough to hold all these communities that need us right now. So do not allow anyone to tell us who we fight for, when we fight for. We either fight for everybody or we fight for nobody. And this is one of those moments where we cannot be selective about the communities that we fight for. And I'll also say this to you, because this work is not easy, right? I'm not here to say, go back and find your friends from the different movements and sit in a room together and bam, coalition, done, you're gonna organize the hell out of like Northampton, Massachusetts. That's not how it works. It requires relationship building. It requires that sometimes you have to show up in another space that is not about you, right? So what I mean by that is that when I, as a Palestinian Muslim American woman, show up in a space that's organizing around Black lives and the sanctity of Black life, I listen. I allow myself to be led by Black people, and in particular by Black women. I offer the skills and resources that I have. I don't go into a space that organizes about Black life to say, excuse me, y'all better be organizing about Palestinians too, or I'm not even going to be in this space. At that moment, it is not about me and the issues that directly impact me. But what happens is, when you show true, authentic, sincere solidarity, and you keep showing up for other communities, guess what happens? Those communities start learning about you. they start understanding the issues that impact you. They start wanting to reciprocate that same solidarity that you have shown them. And guess what happens? You turn around in another space, and guess who's there? The very people that you were just organizing with around Black lives. So that's what solidarity looks like. Solidarity is a selfless act that is not about centering you and your feelings. And it is not a place for you to come and impose your agenda on anybody else. In the Black Lives Matter movement, people in opposition to me in particular have said that I am infiltrating the Black Lives Matter movement so that I can put Palestine on the agenda. What they didn't know is historically there has been Black-Palestinian solidarity for a really long time, way before I was ever born. But let's just say they didn't know that. Let's just say they didn't know. Got to give people the benefit of the doubt, they just didn't know. But being able to have conversations and being able to build with people and learn from communities and travel to their communities, eventually your just cause gets picked up in the movement just based on what you have contributed to the movement and by people learning and hearing your personal stories and how they impact you. And then people start connecting the dots. They say, you know what? What's happening to Palestinians living under military occupation is very similar to what happens to Black people in communities like in Chicago and Detroit, in New York City, in central Brooklyn. This idea that we are criminalized just based on who we are, right? There becomes a connection. Then when people think about the prison industrial complex in this country, there's a lot of connections to make. Did you know that there's a company, an international company called G4S? It's a security company. This company detains and owns and profits off of immigration detention centers and some of the prisons here in these United States of America. So there's an actual corporation that needs you to have beds filled so they can make money. Like, that's just how this prison industrial complex works. It's actually a company where someone's making a fat check off of people, most of whom are people of color, many of whom are nonviolent offenders, and many immigrants whose only violation is the fact that they came here to find a better life and may not have the right documents. Now, that same G4S company also profits off the detention of Palestinians, oftentimes who are in pretrial detention. So you don't think that young people of color and allies are not smart enough to say, wait a minute, there's a connection here. Someone's profiting off of detention of innocent people in another part of the world, but they're also profiting. There's a connection there, right? So this is what's happening in the movement. So if you haven't been around, you can't assume that the minute you sit at the table, people are going to take on your cause, whatever that cause is. Sometimes we're going to have to work for the same solidarity that those folks in the movement are showing to others. So I'll end by saying this. People say, you know, Linda, like, I'm with you here. But I want to know, what could I do? Like, I'm just one person. Like, I may not be part of a group. I'm an individual. Like, I also have a full-time job. I'm also a student. I don't know. I can't be a full-time activist like you are. And I say to people all the time, I have the privilege and honor of making this my life career and to be dedicated in this world and to be from Brooklyn, because when you're from Brooklyn, you could hustle. I've been hustling the hell out of my life for the past 16 years, and it just comes to me now. But for people who are not full-time activists, there are very simple things that we could all do. And the first thing I tell people all the time is, do you even know who your neighbors are? Do you know who lives down the street from you? Do you know who that kid in the back of your class that you've been seeing for the past 2 years, but you never even took the moment to go up and say, hey, my name is Linda, like, what's your name? How are you doing? Are you from around here? Like, we don't even engage in the basic getting to know one another. I have friends of mine who work at corporations, and they say to me, Linda, I don't even know who the guy is that works 6 cubicles down from me. I'm like, how do you work in a space with people and you don't know who those people are? And the reason why getting to know your neighbors and the people closest to you, fellow students, professors, colleagues of yours, is I guarantee you, if when we were interning Japanese Americans, if you had a deep relationship with your neighbor, if your kids played with their kids, if you ever went to their home for dinner and they came to your house for dinner, I will guarantee you that those people would have been a lot more bolder to intervene if officials had come to those homes to drag those people out of their homes. That I will tell you that I would be bolder to defend my undocumented neighbor if I saw ICE officials showing up to my college campus and I knew those undocumented people. You better believe it'd be my body on the line before they took any of those people. Why? Because they're my friends, because I know them, they're my neighbors, they're my colleagues, they may be married to somebody that I know. So that's the importance of getting to know our neighbors and being able to build these close-knit communities, because at the end of the day, I don't put my safety in the hands of law enforcement or the government. I put my safety in the hands of those closest to me in my community. Showing up, somebody said that earlier. When you can show up. Now imagine at the Women's March on Washington. Imagine if women said, you know what, who cares if I go? I mean, they're not going to count me no one's going to know I'm not there, right? So imagine if every woman thought that, or every ally that came thought that, right? There would have been nobody at the Women's March. But every single human being that showed up at the Women's March was counted. And you were part of the masses of the people that decided that enough was enough and you were going to come out in public protest. So if you hear that there's a rally, if there's an event about a topic, maybe you can't stay the whole time, but there's nothing wrong with showing up just to show some solidarity with a student group or with an issue that's happening on campus, or defending a student group when you know that they're in the right and need to be defended. Show up. It really is meaningful for you to understand and never underestimate your power as one individual. Listening is very important in the movement. All of us need to learn the art of listening. It's not hearing. It's not waiting while someone's talking and getting ready to say something back. It's about actually genuinely suspending your judgment and your assumptions about others and being able to say, I'm going to listen to what this person has to say. I guarantee you that your response to that person after listening versus hearing is going to be a lot different than when you were about to respond just from hearing what they had to say. And also making sure that we are listening to the most directly impacted people. Let Latinos and undocumented people, let trans and LGBTQ people tell you how they're feeling and what they need you to do. Let black people tell you what they need from you at this moment. Let people with disabilities tell you what they need from you at this moment. Let the Muslims tell you what they need at this moment. Listening is going to make us a better, more connected, more authentic, more sincere movement, and I promise you that if we do this, we are going to be able to protect one another. And I'll end by saying this. Donate. The opposition is rolling in money. Black money, dark money, whatever they call it, we don't even know where they get their money from. And I will tell you, just so you can understand perspective. When the Women's March on Washington happened, I asked that I wanted to have a role. I didn't want to just be the national co-chair by face and say, oh, see, we have Muslim women, great, diversity, done. I wanted to have an important role. And my role at the Women's March on Washington was I was the lead fundraiser. One of the conditions to my participation in the Women's March was that I would not be part of a march that took money from corporations. I wasn't going to be a part of it. And not only wasn't I going to be a part of it, I was going to criticize it. Because that is the exact reason why we even got ourselves into this situation in the first place, right? And they said to me, are you crazy? We only have like 8 weeks to organize a huge protest. We don't have time to do small dollar donations. I said, why are you underestimating the power of the people? Why are you underestimating the outrage that people have? Why are you underestimating the desire to be part of a resistance and action? So what we did is they were like, all right, we're not going to take money from corporation, because I was not going to be behind, there was not going to be no Coca-Cola or like Walmart behind, I just was not going to do it. We raised on CrowdRise, which is, as you know, is an online fundraising platform, $3 million. We opened a merchandise store to sell Women's March t-shirts, right? I don't know, 1.4, I mean, this is all public because, you know, CrowdRise, all of you can see the numbers. $1.4 million on bonfire.com, which is a platform that you basically fundraise off for selling merchandise, like t-shirts and like tote bags and things like that. And then I went to our friends. I went to Planned Parenthood, I went to Move On, I went to ACLU, I went to groups that align with us, NRDC, which is a climate justice organization. And guess what? The American people didn't fail us. Those who wanted to be part of the resistance did not fail us. In fact, there were grandmas across the country who knew they couldn't show up to a march, and they engaged in a project that you all saw, and all of us at the Women's March were able to wear hats sewn by women across the country who were not able to be physically present at the march. People found something to give to the march, and that is why this protest was the largest single-day protest in U.S. history, and it was led by women of color, and was intersectional in the way that we must be organizing in this very dire time that we are in. So I hope that I see you in the resistance, that you want to be a part of the resistance, that you continue to stay informed, and that more importantly than staying informed, which is really important, that I want you to stay outraged. And I want you to wake up every morning and say, this is not normal. This is not normal. And never, ever allow what is happening around us, the news that we are hearing, to ever sit back and say, maybe this is just how it is, because sisters and brothers, this is not how it's supposed to be. And we should never, ever be a part of normalizing sexism, oppression, misogyny, homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-immigrant, and anti-women zealots. We will not normalize them. I will not normalize them. And I commit to you today to stay on these front lines, regardless of what sacrifices and consequences come with it. Thank you.
So we're going to collect up your questions. If you have questions on your cards, there will be people coming to bring those, bring them together so that we can ask questions tonight for Linda.
This is a great question. Linda, how did growing up in Brooklyn make you the activist that you are today?
I mean, part of being an activist is you just got to be public with your dissent. And that's kind of what Brooklyn and people do. They voice dissent about everything. So that helped a lot. I think for me, it was a combination of things that kind of made me the activist that I am today. One is being from Brooklyn, very important. The second thing is I'm Palestinian, and I grew up, understanding and traveling to Palestine and getting to experience and see oppression firsthand, and especially impacting people that I truly love that are my actual immediate family. And the third one is I'm a Muslim, and I truly believe, and this is the way I interpret my faith, that my religion is a religion that people oftentimes say Islam is a religion of peace. But for me, what's more important about Islam is that it's a religion of justice, and that I am called upon in my religion to stand up in the face of injustice, even if that injustice is coming from my own parents. So imagine how deep that is. If my own parents are engaging in injustice, then my religion tells me I am to stand up against my own parents. So my faith is really what centers me in the work that I do. And that is why I get super sensitive about people who vilify my religion and try to use the examples of some Muslims against my entire faith group. And I will clarify by saying that there are plenty of Muslim misogynists, plenty of Muslim sexists. There are some Muslim terrorists in this world, and that's in many communities, but I hope that those are not the people that reflect the true beauty of the religion that allows me to sit here on this platform today and allows me to be a social justice leader here in the United States.
Maybe this is a related question, but I was really struck by many things in your talk, but toward the end of your talk about your faith in grassroots movements. And we're in such a corporate culture. I'd like to know what the roots of that, what gave you the courage and the faith to think that you could pull off the Women's March?
It's one of the reasons why I'm getting attacked so badly by the right wing. It's the idea that women had the audacity to say that we were going to organize a resistance against a fascist administration, that we were going to stand up to misogyny and sexism, and that we were going to do it and we were going to win and we were going to be successful. And when people found out that we weren't taking corporate money, even in the movement, they were like, how are you going to do this? And one of the reasons why I came to that conclusion that I didn't want to take corporate money and why I have faith in the grassroots is because that's how I'm an organizer. My organization's funded by members of my community, right? We take some private foundation money for sure, but majority of the donations that my organization runs on are from local professionals, old alumni, old staff of ours, people who actually are committed and believe in the work that we do. I also came off the Bernie Sanders campaign. Bernie Sanders was like, I'm going to show you what real democracy looks like. And you don't have to agree with Bernie on anything except that one thing, that he showed the whole world, even people on the other side of Bernie Sanders. He showed people that you can run a competitive presidential campaign without super PACs and corporate money. And in the month of March in 2016, we raised $53 million off of small donations from Americans across the country. So when I was able to witness that with my own eyes as someone who was in the campaign, then I knew that we could do that again for the Women's March. And you know what? We did do it. And we did it in a big way. And we got to show people their potential. And when people saw, imagine if you gave the Women's March $20 and you had no idea what we were going to fail or succeed. You were just so moved that you were like, I'm going to drop $20. What's the worst that's going to happen? I'll lose my $20. But imagine when you gave that $20 and what ended up happening is you ended up investing in the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. You better believe those same people that are giving us money again, which is why the Women's March on Washington is now an entity. We are a political advocacy organization, and our next steps are that we are committed to 2018, and we understand that electoral strategy is only one part of a larger puzzle of organizing, but God darn it, it's an important part of the puzzle right about now. So that's the second level of being able to use the relationships and the donations, the small donations to move forward. And in 2018, we'll be focusing on potential red districts and purple districts that we hope that we're going to bring back to our side, even though our side isn't always perfect, but is darn it much better than that other side.
Linda, I wanted to ask, what do Muslim feminists contribute to the overall feminist movement, and what can the movement learn from, and you were talking about that deep kind of listening in particular?
So I think that there needs to be a really important conversation about what feminism is and who gets to be a feminist, right, in the movement. And the reason why I say that is that oftentimes when people think about Muslim feminists, we come in a lot of different shapes and sizes and we look different, right? So for example, a Muslim feminist could be a woman in hijab and she could be a woman not in hijab, right? A Muslim feminist could be a woman who has had some horrible experiences at the hands of a regime, a dictatorship in a Muslim majority country, or at the hands of a male relative, right? But a Muslim feminist could also be a woman that has been uplifted and empowered by Muslims and Muslim communities, right? So there's kind of a picture that's been painted of what a Muslim feminist is. It has to be someone that's so outraged by the misogyny of Islam that all of a sudden we jumped up and we're like, okay, we're feminists now. In fact, Islam, for me, the way I interpret my religion, is that Islam is in fact a feminist religion. I mean, I can be married and keep my own name. I can have my own income that I don't have to share with my husband. I can own property. There's a lot of different elements of Islam. I'm not saying that Muslim majority countries are practicing what they're supposed to practice in Islam. There's a big distinction about Muslim governments versus actual religion of Islam. But Muslim feminists have a lot to offer the movement. It allows us to challenge the notions of what feminists are supposed to do when it comes to other women across the world. So there's been this idea that we need white women to come to Afghanistan and save us, right? Or save Muslim women. The question is, how can we use our resources and tools to empower women to tell us what they need? Can I be, as a Muslim woman, as a woman that covers my hair, is modest, am I a feminist? Am I feminist enough for folks? And I think that the movement right now is so diverse. It's so complex. There's so many different elements and a lot of important conversations that have never been had, right? Ever within the feminist movement that are happening right now. And guess what? They're challenging. They make some of us feel uncomfortable. But you know what? We will never get anywhere, and no other movement has gotten anywhere without some sort of struggle, without some sort of tension, and eventually we walk out, maybe not agreeing on every single philosophical issue or every single social justice issue, but we end up realizing that all women have something to contribute, that we all deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and that we all have a place at the table, so as long as we are not trying to take the rights of any other group of women away.
Okay, so the question is, I Googled you and I found hateful lies against you by ultra-right-wing apologists for Israel. How can I, as a Jewish American, best be an ally to you and to moderate Muslim Americans caught in a wave of bigotry?
That needs a whole movement, all of us asking. What I say to all of us is we all have an individual responsibility, and if you know somebody, like you actually have a personal relationship with them or you know of their work, if you see something on your timeline that you know is blatant lies, that it's your moment to intervene with someone that you know. Oftentimes it's our people that we know that are on our timelines, and you're like, why are you sharing this? Or being able to say, actually, so-and-so, I know her. Me and her have organized an event together. I actually went to her house for Passover. I've met her family. She's actually a good person. She's actually not in Islam, or whatever the situation is, that we have to intervene in these moments, right? And I'll give you an example. I'm embroiled in a controversy right now. And actually, immediately after the Women's March is when all that hate mail started, or the blog started about me. I'm all this stuff, Sharia law advocate, I'm anti-Semitic, all this other outrageous things. And I was so overwhelmed that I actually was like, I'm not even going on social media. Stop screenshotting stuff, stop sending me people threatening me, I don't want to see it. And then a few hours later, my sister sends me a screenshot, and I'm like, I don't even want to look at this. And I just look at it because it's my sister. And it actually, a hashtag, it was called I Stand with Linda, or I March with Linda. And it was trending internationally. Anywhere from Senator Bernie Sanders to Maxwell, just to show you the broad range here. To advocates and people high profile like Van Jones, the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, people in the Jewish community, people even that would be considered center on issues of Israel-Palestine, right? Who may not agree with me on Israel-Palestine, but people came out for me and said, how dare you call her an anti-Semite? She is a leader with conviction and principles and values, and guess what? I don't even agree with her. But you know what? I respect her for the work that she did. And this, for me, is why I have courage. Because I have a lot of haters and a lot of people putting out lies, but my track record is so clear. And there was a meme one time that I saw on Facebook. I love memes, by the way. Every time I see a meme that I like, I save it. My phone's full of memes, 5,000. And it says something like, live your life in a way that when people say bad things about you, nobody would believe them. And that is the mantra that I live by, that no matter what anybody says about me, that my public record of social justice for the past 16 years is very clear. So what I hope for the person that asked that question is, if you have to intervene in a conversation, or if you see a post and you want to go in there and say, actually, I know her work, and this is a lie, and I hope that you take this post down. If we all engaged in that in some way, we can potentially help counter this type of attacks and smear campaigns on organizations, on individuals within the Muslim American community.
So what do you say to, and this is a question written with respect and love, what do you say to queer and genderqueer people who critique the Women's March and were uncomfortable with pussy hats being worn as symbols of womanhood?
So you must have missed the first discussion we had today, which was before this event. The reason I brought that up in the last discussion was when I was talking about, as a person who's schooled in Kingian nonviolence and the 6 principles of Kingian nonviolence, which are, one of them is to suspend judgment, right? And to not assume. And what happened was, after the whole pussy hat thing happened, folks who are trans and people who identify as women, right, basically blatantly were like, not all women have vaginas. Believe it or not, we were like, defensive. There was the Women's March did not defend ourselves. Not only was that a critique that came, by the way, from trans folks, it also came from women of color. Not everybody's vagina's pink also, right? And I know that people don't think on that level. I didn't think, I will be honest with you, we were so entrenched with 20 hours a day worth of work that it didn't really come to my mind. So when we were approached about it and we were critiqued about it, believe it or not, it was a learning moment. It was a way for people to say, you know what, at the end of the day, these women who organized the Women's March are our sisters. And we need to call them in. And we need to have a conversation with them. And when we were called in, and when we were able to have that conversation, the response was, we profusely apologize if we excluded anyone in any way, because that absolutely was not our intention. And thank you very much for bringing that to our attention, and so that we can learn for next time to ensure that when we are organizing, that we are more thoughtful about the ways in which we represent people. Because it was hard for us to figure out all these things in a matter of 7 weeks when you're trying to do logistics and figure out how to get 1 million people to Washington, D.C. But we didn't even say that to the people, because that shouldn't have been an excuse either. So that was one critique, but I'll offer another critique. Originally, when the Women's March started, there was critiques from women of color. They were like, how are white women going to organize a women's march without women of color in leadership? And that was a fair critique to have. And even when the women of color joined the Women's March, and three of the 4 national co-chairs were women of color, Carmen is Mexican-American Chicana, Tamika Mallory is African-American, I am Palestinian-American Muslim. Even when we joined, it was still not enough. And that was okay. We had to prove ourselves that we were going to center black women, that there were black women that were organizing with us. Was the march overwhelmingly white? Absolutely. And that was okay. So as long as the program, that the messaging, that our unity principles centered marginalized communities, that for us in that small amount of time we had, we felt like we did what we could. And now that we are moving forward with the Women's March, going back and saying, who's going to be on the board of the Women's March? Who's going to lead our electoral strategy? Who's going to help us lead our policy asks in the different communities? Are we going to talk about people with disabilities and not have people with disabilities centered and leading that conversation? So these are conversations that are happening right now. So what I say to you here is that I want you to still engage the Women's March in whatever critiques that you have. And there are going to always be critiques, because people are human and we make mistakes. But at the same time that we do that with each other on college campuses, that you are able to suspend judgment, that you not assume what people's intentions are, and be able to say, you know what, that word that you used the other day at that meeting that we were at, I just want you to know, I didn't want to share it there, but I really made me feel I was offended, or it hurt my heart, or I was triggered by it. And I bet you that person will say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trigger you, and maybe I should have said it this way, maybe I meant to say. You will believe, trust me, I've done this many times. I have almost never been in a conversation where I actually suspended my judgment and my assumptions, had an open-minded, open-hearted conversation, and actually left feeling like, you know what, I misunderstood them, but I was able to educate them and provide them with suggestions and alternatives for the future. And guess what happens next time? They have actually taken my suggestions and have actually implemented them in a way that makes them feel whole and makes them feel like they are included. So I hope that that's how we choose to treat each other in the left and the progressive movement, really as any Americans, that we give each other the benefit of the doubt, that we're all trying to be good people, but even good people make mistakes.
And then in that last question, you mentioned the left, but someone's asked a question about Republicans. And she says, even here, she said, we're a pretty homogeneous community, pretty liberal, but there are conservatives on campus who feel unsafe being Republican here. How do we engage these folks and not vilify them?
I was going to pull this up earlier, but I'm going to pull it up right now because I wanted to say it right. So there's a tweet that I pinned on my Twitter account that I go back to quite often when I'm about to have a conversation with people who may not agree with me, right? or I may not share a political party with them, I may not share a political ideology with them, and it says this. It says we can disagree and still love each other, unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and the right to exist. So what I'm saying to you is that we all as human beings deserve to believe whatever we want to believe, right? But if your view, I'll just give an example. If you don't believe that Palestine and Palestinians exist, then I can't have a relationship with you because you have denied me my humanity and my right to exist as a Palestinian, right? If you are anti-trans and you don't think trans people should exist, or that's some sort of, then how is a trans person supposed to have a relationship with you if you are denying them their right to exist in the way that they choose to exist? So do people understand what I'm trying to say here? It's about, I don't agree with half the people in my family. Literally. Every time I'm at a dinner table with my family, somebody says something and boom, it's back and forth. And these are people that I love. But the arguments that I have with people in my family are not rooted in my oppression, right? It's just a matter of difference of opinion. You like potato pie, somebody else likes sweet potato pie. Or sweet potato pie, somebody likes apple pie. Like, it's not, I'm oversimplifying it, but even there are Republicans that are outraged at the President of the United States of America. I've spoken to them myself. I've also, believe it or not, have been to places like Tennessee and Ohio where white women have come up to me and say, I don't know why, I have no idea who you are, I don't have a personal relationship, but I want to share something with you. And I'm like, okay. They said, I voted for Trump, and I regret the day that I walked into those polls. The fact that they felt like they could come tell me that I opened a space for them where they didn't feel like I was going to judge them and say, well, you're the most horrific person that ever walked this earth for voting for this man. Hey, I'm just happy that they've come around. So what I'm saying to you is that let's have differences, let's debate our differences, but we can do that in a way that is respectful and that is not rooted in other people's oppression or taking other people's rights away or questioning their humanity or who they choose to be and how they choose to exist in this world.
Okay. Linda, I know that you love your children and your family so much, but where do you get the courage and the strength to be in the street? I'm scared that if something happens to me, what's going to happen to them? Where do you get this buildup of courage?
So I didn't say this up there, but I want to say this here because I think it's really important. There was always someone that had to have courage, that had no choice but to be courageous at so many moments in human history. And the question you have to ask yourself, are you going to be that person that's going to choose courage in the moment when we need it the most? And how I rationalize this and all the threats that I get, and I will never, I need like 40 more years to be anywhere near any of these people. But what gives me solace in the work that I do in amidst all the threats, all the assault, online harassment, is I think about people like Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think how people talk about Dr. Martin Luther King in 2017, right? And oftentimes in the movements, he gets used against us. Say, why can't you just be peaceful like Dr. Martin Luther King? And I'm like, what Dr. Martin Luther King do you know? I mean, and this idea that Dr. Martin Luther King apparently was this peaceful man and his whole mission was to bring white people and black people together. And that's not who Dr. Martin Luther King was, nor is it what he was trying to do. In fact, the white people who came to organize with Dr. Martin Luther King were moved at a moral, like from a moral, spiritual place to say, I will not sit back as a white person. I will stand up and demand the same equal rights for black people. And that's how they showed up to be in allyship with Dr. Martin Luther King, right? Dr. Martin Luther King's mission was equal human rights for all people, but in particular, black people in these United States of America. And that was his mission. And guess what? He was vilified. He was demonized. His house was attacked. Death threats. The FBI called him the most dangerous man in America. His organizations were under unwarranted surveillance by different levels of law enforcement. He was a victim of police brutality. He wrote you letters from inside prison walls, right? And he got assassinated at the age of 39, although they told us he was a peaceful man. So the way I rationalize this by saying that I personally have come to terms that something could happen to me. And I have prepared my family for this, knowing that my children have a very supportive network. Their dad is wonderful. like I wouldn't be able to do this without him. And my parents, they have grandparents, they have aunts and uncles. We figured it all out. And I say to people all the time, I'm content with the life that I live. I lived a righteous life. I did everything that I could that I felt was the right thing to do. And in order for us to find that courage, we have to come to terms with what the consequences are going to be. And that doesn't mean that everybody has to be at the front lines, but there have to be moments where we choose courage. Because fear is a choice. Fear, you have to choose to be afraid. You actually get to. People think that fear is a reactive reaction that we have sometimes, but you get to choose whether you stay afraid or whether you choose courage in the face of fear. And I have chosen to choose courage in the face of fear in this moment to protect first and foremost my own family, but to protect those that I love who happen to be undocumented, who happen to be black, who happen to be queer, who happen to be pretty much every demographic in this United States of America. And I think sometimes we have to sit and have these conversations with ourselves, and I have unfortunately had to have this conversation with myself many times over and over again, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being in this moment and saying that I'm going to choose courage.
All right. I was happy to hear you talk about not taking corporate money, but I was concerned by how little critique of capitalism was incorporated into the march, and how little has been integrated into the incredible emerging intersectional feminism in action. Can you say something about that?
Capitalism is the root of all evil. Everybody knows that, right? That's like, just in case you didn't already think that I knew that. Okay. Language is very important in the moment that we are in right now. The Women's March on Washington is organizing with women who have never organized a day in their lives, okay? Oftentimes what we do in the progressive left is we talk to each other. Capitalism, neoliberalism. I guarantee you if you went out into the street and surveyed people, maybe this neighborhood, maybe this area might not be a good example. You know, because you're all pretty liberal, you all probably know. But I've done this. Go somewhere else that's not a liberal community, kind of any even large metropolitan city like New York City, and ask people what they think neoliberalism is. I swear to you, and I trust me on this, and I challenge you to do this, your own test, and if you got to videotape it to let others believe you, and believe me. I did this once where I literally randomly would get into a conversation with random people on the line, like at a bank or something, and then I would ask them, I said, do you know what, I'd say, you know, I heard somebody talking about neoliberalism. Do you know what that means? Even though I know what it means. And I swear to God, in a matter of 10 conversations that I had in a matter of about 90 minutes, not one person knew what neoliberalism was. In fact, some people tried to define it as some sort of liberalism, like they actually thought it was something positive. So the reason why I say that to your question is that we're not organizing with people who are already where you are. And we're trying to use universal basic language that's going to bring people on board. And then eventually, once you have people on board, you start getting into these concepts. And oftentimes, people who engage against capitalism or want to bring down capitalism are preaching to the choir. Because if they weren't, we would have probably ended capitalism by now. And we have to really understand that our language has to be accessible to the masses. So if my immigrant mother from Palestine doesn't know what neoliberalism or capitalism is, right, or doesn't understand heteropatriarchy or all these other things that we say in the movement, then we're basically staying in these very small circles, right? And we just keep organizing around each other like a dog running after his tail. We're trying to build power here. We're trying to bring people on board. So if you can take take the concept of capitalism and break it down into a way that somebody understands. No corporate money. Don't let the corporations own us, right? Holding corporations accountable to the oppression that they are complicit in when it comes to our communities, right? When we're talking about eradicating poverty, when we're talking about, you know, building power at a grassroots level, that the power lies in the hands of the people, it's kind of like working against capitalism without saying we're working against capitalism, because nobody knows what capitalism actually is. So what I'm saying to you is the kind of organizing that I engage in because I started organizing in an immigrant community that was new to this country is that I had to meet them where they're at, and that I had to introduce them slowly to lexicon that we use in the movement. And if we're going to continue to use this exclusive, elitist, intellectual lexicon, in fact, what you are doing is you are marginalizing people out of the movement. You are engaging in the same exclusion that other people are engaging in. So when you're about to organize something outside of your, maybe on the college campuses, yes, you can talk about capitalism and heteropatriarchy and gender nonconforming and all these things, important. And I bet you a lot of people on your college campus will understand. But I'll give you another example. I took immigrant women, most of whom were from Yemen, to a meeting, right? It was their first time. And at the meeting, they asked them, everyone, to say their name and their preferred gender pronoun, which is cool. I do that everywhere. But you can't expect women who just showed up, some of whom have only been here for less than a year, to understand what it means. What do you mean preferred gender pronoun? That's not something that they understand or is in a context of their experience. But at the same time, you also understand that you don't want to be offensive in a space. So here we are, and here I am in a space like, oh my God. So what I did was I went up to an organizer, because I had like 16 ladies that were there. So it wasn't like 2, where I could just take them to the side and explain and try to figure out like, how, you know, and they're already, English is not their first language. There's already a lot of barriers to that space. So I went up to one of the organizers, because I saw the agenda on the wall. It said your name, your preferred gender pronoun. That's what I was like, oh no. We're going to unintentionally hurt somebody's feelings. And I went to one of the organizers and I said, look, I'm with 16 women. They are all immigrants. Some of them have only been here for a few months. Preferred gender pronoun is not something that they're used to. It's not something that they might have ever heard before. And I just want you to know that. And I want you, in hopes that no one here is personally, offended if they don't share or don't understand or something like that. And actually what they did was, because they wanted to create an inclusive space, is they actually, just for that day, they didn't do that. Because they could have said, I don't care, I'm going to do that. And your people are going to have to figure it out, right? Or they're going to have to feel singled out because they don't know, right? That they're less educated or less inclusive than everybody else. So that's the kind of solidarity that queer person who was the kind of leading the room understood, based on my relationship with them, the circumstance that we were in at that moment. So I think that is the kind of spaces and organizing and words and being able to meet people where they're at and not stop where they're at. We're supposed to keep calling them in, right? Keep educating them, keep investing our time in them, and not assuming that everybody wakes up every morning with your whole experience as their whole experience, and not assuming that everybody understands all of your identities, right? When I'm sure that we also don't understand those identities of those women who came into that space, right? So again, language is everything. And I'll say the last thing about that. When we look at the right, and in particular I'm talking about people who are not the ones that weren't sure and were voting for Donald Trump for economic reasons. I'm talking about the ones that were like, we love everything that this guy stands for. His message was, believe it or not, quite simple, right? I was organizing in Ohio. Every house was like, Trump, Pence, make America great again. That's it. Who doesn't want to make America great? So if you're generally an apolitical person living in rural town in Ohio, you're struggling economically, and here comes a candidate telling you all this things that have happened to you over the past 10 years, you lost your job, you lost everything, and I'm here to make America great again. And they're like, well, you know what, that really speaks to me. And I think we have to be able to speak in that very basic language and use universal principles about inclusion, dignity, respect, family. These are the kinds of words that bring all people together.
Linda, this is the last question. What was your favorite moment in the Women's March?
So I'm going to share my hardest moment, and I'm going to share my favorite moment. I'll start with the positive. Now maybe I'll end with the positive one. My hardest moment at the Women's March was Thursday night before the Women's March. And me, Tamika, Carmen, and a couple of others were literally sitting in a hotel room, and it was like 11:30 p.m. And everybody, we're all on our phones, and I happened to be on Instagram. And I'm scrolling on Instagram, and then I'm scrolling by my son's page, and there's a college acceptance letter on my son's Instagram that I never saw. And all of a sudden, I just broke out into tears. And everybody was like, what happened? I was like, my son gets accepted into his first college with a scholarship, and I have to find out about it on Instagram. You know, I'm bawling my eyes out. And that moment, I felt so horrible. Like, I felt like such a bad parent. I was like, I'm such a bad mother. What am I doing here? Like, is this worth it? Am I sacrificing my family? Or like all this stuff, I literally engaged myself in a guilt trip, and it was the most horrible. Like, I was crying for like an hour straight. And then I called my son. And I was like, how? Because I didn't want him to hear me crying, so I waited till that part was over. And I called him up, and I was like, why would you post your first college acceptance letter on Instagram and not tell me? He said, Mom, he said, you're organizing the largest protest ever. He's like, it's the day after tomorrow. He's like, you would find out sooner or later that I got accepted into college. But anyway, it was like a horrible, beautiful moment, that it was the moment where where you come to terms and say, you know what, maybe your children actually understand what you're doing. So that was a horrible, great moment. But the real beautiful moment of the Women's March was what I said earlier, when we showed up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and mind you, it's still dark outside at that time at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's January. And you show up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and there were people already there, literally. And I'm not talking about 5 people. I'm talking about like 5,000, 10,000. And as I stood up, I went to stand on the stage, so I was obviously much higher than the people. And literally, I stood for 10 minutes straight without moving, and it was a steady stream of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And it was the most remarkable moment that I know I will ever experience in my whole entire life, that people decided that the day after a horrific day where we thought we lost the soul of our nation on Friday, that on Saturday people showed up to remind the rest of our country that the soul of our nation is still here, that we are out, loud, and proud. And what I will say that makes me proud is that ever since the Women's March on Washington, and by the way, there's been organizing for centuries before the Women's March. I'm not here to say that the Women's March all of a sudden started, we're the first people to organize marches or movements. But in context of this administration, I do believe that the Women's March on Washington was the spark to a consistent movement that is almost on the daily. People are organizing and resisting somewhere, somehow across this country on affordable care, on issues of LGBTQ issues. I mean, I don't know people, I was moved by the airports. I never even thought of even protesting at an airport. And just putting out information, and people didn't have to do much explaining. Muslim ban, meet us at JFK Airport. You show up at JFK Airport, there's 10,000 people at JFK Airport, at LAX Airport, at DTW Airport, at the Chicago Airport, at San Francisco, in Houston, and in Dallas. Like, the most remarkable thing. And I say that a women-led movement sparked the minds and hearts of people who have never organized. And what I'm going to say in closing is, I hope that those that showed up to the Women's March, that those of us who are in the resistance now, stay in the resistance. That you don't leave us, that you don't normalize, that you don't walk away, that your presence is needed consistently and persistently. And let's be as consistent and persistent as those who are hateful and divisive and want to take our country back to very darker days. Thank you.